Welcome to the Lobster Talks podcast by Lobster Capital, where we celebrate the bold thinkers and innovators driving change in the startup world. I'm your host, Gabriel Jarrosson, and today I'm thrilled to have Anada Lakra with us, the co-founder and CEO of BoldVoice. BoldVoice is, of course, an incredible AI-powered app that's helping non-native English speakers build pronunciation skills and fluency, basically pronounce English better. And Anada, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me today.
I'm excited to chat. Okay, so let's dive in. I really love starting to get to know founders. And of course, I know you, but for the listeners who don't have the privilege and the chance, I love the origin stories of how you came to building what you're building, in essence, BoldVoice. You're, of course, a non-native English speaker, so I'm guessing that has to do with it, but please tell us how you came to starting BoldVoice.
I like to say that it took me about 10 years to start BoldVoice because that's when my personal experience with this problem started. That later on inspired me to start BoldVoice. So a bit of my personal background is that I was born and raised in Albania and I moved to the US for college. And I was the first person in my family to go to the US. So it was a lot of newness to me. But what surprised me is that the thing that I initially felt very comfortable and confident in, which was my English communication, ended up being one of my biggest obstacles, which took me by surprise because by that point I'd learned English in school, as a lot of people do, right? You start learning English at a very young age. So I had about 10 years of experience with taking English classes, and I'd passed all the tests. So I was really surprised when I first moved to the US that when I spoke, people kept asking me to repeat myself, and I clearly wasn't getting understood or really understanding others when they spoke in their native environment. So I quickly realized that although my writing and my reading and comprehension skills were very good, my speaking wasn't, and I'd never paid attention to pronunciation. And over time, it started affecting my confidence and my ability to speak up in important environments, both in the classroom, but also later down the line in job interviews and really consequential environments. So yeah, I felt surprised by this. I also realized that all of my international classmates were pretty much going through that same experience. And it was very frustrating because we had all the ideas, we knew what we wanted to say. It was just purely a matter of verbal communication that was holding us back. So again, many years after it, I didn't have personally any solutions that I knew to access. Now I know that I could have taken accent coaching classes, but they still are very expensive. They cost $200 an hour. It's extremely out of, the realm of possibility for most people. So I just kind of was very attentive, listening to people, and trying to improve my own pronunciation. But it's a really hard skill to acquire, especially as an adult. So many years after this, I went back to school to get my MBA, and I was surrounded again by all these international classmates like I was back in college. And I realized that the problem was still the exact same as I'd experienced it myself. And you could see this vast difference in these big auditoriums where the Americans would raise their hands and speak confidently, and then all the internationals would really struggle with that. So this problem was brought back to the forefront of my mind. And around the same time, I was hearing more and more about AI and how speech models were getting more and more powerful. So these kind of two things kind of clashed in my brain. And I started thinking, is there a way to apply this new AI technology to solve this problem that is, in a way, the universal immigrant problem that I'd experienced myself and people were still very much experiencing? And that was the initial light bulb moment that led me to start BoldVoice about 2 years ago.
That's absolutely awesome. I really, really love, I probably have told you that before, but I really love a startup where the founder has a problem, tries to solve his or her own problem, and also in conjunction with the new technology. So it's exactly what you said. It's actually quite rare where you have a problem and you see a new technology emerging which can actually solve your problem, and boom, you bring the two together. That's probably what I would say, probably a perfect origin story. So that's absolutely amazing. I was listening to you and thinking, many people have a terrible accent, but they don't know about it. I guess it's not the same if you're in the US and if people do ask you to repeat when you're talking. I'm French, for those who don't know, And actually, a lot of French people think they speak English really well. They don't even realize that they need BoldVoice. Do you think that's an obstacle to your growth, to your business?
Well, initially, we are working with people in the US who are very familiar with the problem, in quotes, because they are speaking English day to day. They can see in people's faces when they don't understand them or when they ask to repeat themselves. So that's our initial target market. With that being said, these days, English has become and has been for a while, but is more and more becoming the de facto language of business. And with video communication, Zoom, being a prevalent technology with remote teams becoming distributed teams becoming more and more of a thing, it's kind of impossible to hide these days behind just written communication. You do have to, if you're selling your services or even collaborating with your other teammates around the world, it's more and more likely that you're using your verbal communication. So whereas, 10 plus years before, maybe it wasn't so important that your accent was, or your pronunciation skills, your speaking confidence and fluency was at that level because you could kind of, hide behind that wall. Now that's not the case anymore, which is great, by the way, because now people all over the world can access hopefully similar opportunities without having to leave their home countries. But that also makes it even a bigger requirement that your English communication and fluency is on par. Because if you want to apply for that, likely better paying job, right, that is at an American company for a lot of people, or if you want to work in an international company and have stakeholders in other places or sell to an American or a primarily English speaking audience, that's a must have these days. So, of course, awareness is a big part of it. But I think, again, with the interconnected world that we have today, even more so than even 3-4 years ago, I think it is becoming, the awareness is more and more there. And BoldVoice there is a solution once you have the awareness.
No, you're absolutely right. And on top of that, like you said, English is becoming the business language of the world. The USA are becoming one of, they've always been, but they're still being and going to be for the next probably 10, maybe 20, 30 years, one of the best countries to do business in. And so many people actually want to move to the US. We hear so much about the southern, border and everybody trying to cross it. Pretty much so many people in the world, I wouldn't say everyone, but so many people in the world want to go to the US and work. And you mentioned something that I want to highlight because I think it's super important is BoldVoice is not about teaching you English. It's about perfecting your accent. And you mentioned it's about confidence as well, which I think is super important. Some people have probably the on-paper knowledge of English, but they don't have the confidence to speak it out loud in a meeting. And so this is also quite important. And like you said, there's a lot of people who are going to need this in the future. But okay, I do have to ask you, AI for language and language learning, even though you're not language learning, you're confidence and accent practicing, but it still is a very, very competitive space. So tell us more a little bit about BoldVoice. What sets you guys apart? What's the secret sauce or the special ingredient?
It is a crowded market, but what we noticed is that a lot of the action is happening in the early stages of language learning. So helping you get the basics of grammar, vocabulary, obviously Duolingo is a prime example there. And they've built a very, very effective game, basically to help you also learn English as a side effect or other languages. But what we realized is that especially for English, knowing English on paper is not enough, right? Going back to the example that I shared of my own experiences where I had not just done the Duolingo level, but many more after. And yet I still wasn't able to be as confident and fluent as I wanted to be in those professional settings. So we realized that there's a big market for that advanced or upper intermediate level of user, of person who already has done all that learning on paper and now is trying to bring it to the real life. There's a big gap for that person who's especially trying to work on their pronunciation and their accent. And the reason is that those tools are not well set up to do this because learning grammar, vocabulary is so different from learning pronunciation. The former happens in the brain. You just memorize rules, you practice those. But the latter, pronunciation, happens in the mouth. It's a completely different exercise. It's a physical skill set that you're building. We sometimes call it like a gym for your mouth. So it's almost closer to, let's say, the Peloton app or whatever app people use to do their workouts because you're getting a mouth workout in a way you're learning to move your mouth, your tongue in different ways to produce different sounds and create different speech patterns. So from the beginning, we knew that we had to approach it in a very different way than the current English learning tools. And for BoldVoice specifically, the way we built it is by marrying two different learning modalities. One is by learning from and observing accent coaches who are professionals who demonstrate how to move your mouth exactly to make the sounds, just like you'd observe a fitness instructor, right? Demonstrating the rep that you're going to do. And then we pair this with practice, speaking practice, where you record your voice and instantly it will grade your pronunciation. So the idea is that you're watching this video from the coach, you're explaining you how to make this tricky sound, like let's say the American R sound that's tricky for a lot of people. And you're getting the reps by watching the coach and mimicking them. And then the coach says, okay, now repeat after me the word, let's say rural, which is very hard. And then you tap the mic, you record your voice, and instantly the AI will say, your first R was good, but the second one was not good. Let's work on that. So it's almost mimicking a one-on-one session you'd have with a coach, but through the app in a completely, not one-on-one, but scalable way, which also, by the way, obviously makes it much more affordable because you're paying for an app instead of a live coach. So essentially, we're inspired by how these, and by the way, we're also working with Hollywood accent coaches to bring a level of quality that has never really existed in English learning apps or tools before. And we've modeled it after how they would work with their celebrity clients in one-on-one sessions. And we've kind of put that same experience into the app.
I love that. I love the way of thinking about BoldVoice, like almost the Peloton for your mouth, like you said, or the workout for your mouth. But you're probably right. I never thought of it that way. But accent is really about building probably muscle memory with the way you're actually talking, right? Because that's where accent come from. They actually come from your old language, and you keep the pronunciation. So it's a gym. It's a gym for your mouth. I think that's really cool. A really cool way to think about it. And that's awesome. If you're bringing Hollywood, obviously, that's the English everybody hears in the movies. The English everybody hears on TV. So that's probably the English that everyone wants to speak. And I was listening to you. I'm not the best judge of accents, not being a native, but you are the best advertisement for your own thing, because there's no way I would have guessed that you're not a native speaker from my point of view. So that's, thank God for that. Otherwise, that would have been tricky for you, probably.
I think I would definitely say that I have an accent, but it's not about getting the perfect accent and somebody not ever being able to tell that you are, say, not American. Like, sounding American is not really the goal. It's more about avoiding those situations that can get very frustrating, where people keep asking you to repeat yourself, or maybe they don't ask you that, but you can kind of tell that they're getting confused, or maybe they're starting to prioritize and focus on how you're saying things instead of what you're saying. So it's more about removing those walls rather than transforming people into Americans, because it's also important for people to also be able to keep some of these parts of their culture and their accent they're coming from. And I would say you, Gabriel, obviously you have a bit of an accent, but you speak incredible English. So again, I wouldn't say that what we're trying to teach at BoldVoice is Americanizing every accent. It's more so that, again, you're clear, confident, and you have to never second guess yourself when you speak.
No, you're right. I mean, I do have an accent for sure. The French accent has all kinds of reputations, so whatever. I am trying to erase it, but I guess it's, I haven't been using BoldVoice on a daily basis. I should have, but I haven't.
Get back to it. 5 minutes a day, it's all it takes.
Exactly. The confidence is there for sure. Okay. Tell us about the startup journey, because obviously you're crushing it, and I'll give you the opportunity at some point, whenever you feel like it, to brag about the results and the numbers, because they're amazing. But tell us as well about some difficult moments. What challenges did you face? What was maybe the most difficult part in starting all this and getting where you are today?
Mm-hmm. I think as a second-time founder, I will say that I've been able to avoid some of the pains of my first startup, for example, because I had those lessons and was able to move through things faster. But at the same time, that doesn't make anything easy per se. That just makes you move faster to face the challenges of the various stages of running the company. I will say that it's nothing particularly unusual at various points of the company. It's various challenges. So, for example, we raised our first round I'll talk about the fundraising piece. We raised our first round in summer of 2021, which was the peak of the market. And then we just raised another round a few months ago, back towards fall of 2023. So we saw the height of the market where everybody was just throwing money at everything. And we also saw the trough. And we were able to successfully fundraise there, which very thankful for our investors, yourself included. But it was definitely a tough fundraising environment, despite all the proof points and all the success that we had accumulated and everything we had to show. It was so tricky to stand out in that kind of a market and get the valuation that we wanted, which ultimately we're able to do. But fundraising is always tricky. My best advice there is that we always have been relatively conservative with how much we've raised and how much we burn. So we put ourselves in a situation where we had more than a year of runway in the bank when we started the process. And therefore, that gave us quite a bit of leverage. So that didn't make the process easy per se, but that was a big lesson that I take away, to always try to raise from a position of strength. And then there's always challenges like hiring a team. How do you motivate like these incredibly talented people to jump ship from being able to, have, say, FANG level salaries and perks into the unknowns of a startup? So building the team and constantly at every step being able to bring the right people is one of those things that you don't think about really when you're not a founder. But so much of my job these days is hiring and making sure the team is motivated and the right people are in the right places. So yeah, that part is definitely challenging, but also, the most important.
That's fascinating to hear you. In just a couple seconds, you mentioned so many gems. First of all, you lived through the peak and then the bottom. You're still able to raise. Congrats. That's in itself very amazing. And obviously very happy to be on board as well. But it's really a great lesson for everyone to remember that when things are going crazy, valuations, and it's so easy to raise, remember that's not necessarily normal. It's not necessarily forever. So many people raised at crazy high valuations in 2021, 2022, only to be in very, very big trouble a couple months later and not able to fundraise. So many startups just, closed their doors, as you know, and you're still here, you raised. So congrats. And then on hiring, I want to highlight this as well, because it's probably the number one challenge that I hear from every single startup. And what's really fascinating to me is basically it's impossible to do other than manually. It's impossible to scale. It's impossible to automate. Hiring 100 years ago and today and 100 years from now, it's still, human to human. Like you said, how do you motivate people and how do you find the right people? It is one of the hardest things to do. Obviously, everything else Silicon Valley has automated and scaled, and that's great. But human relationships obviously are extremely hard. And that's, what you're struggling with. It's a good sign. It means when startups are growing, it's their number one challenge to bring the right people on board. You briefly mentioned, and I want to double click on that because everyone's going to be interested hearing you. You mentioned it's your second startup. And so you kind of avoided some pitfalls and from the learnings from your first startup. So tell us more. Which were the learnings from the very first startup? What did you learn along the way that people could reuse?
So in our first startup, which I built actually with the same co-founder, Ilya, that we are working again together now in BoldVoice, it was a reference checking platform for job candidates. So funny that we're just talking about hiring. And we had this idea that I still think is very valid and trying to solve a very big problem of getting to know people from a culture fit perspective before you hire them, so you don't make painful hiring mistakes. And we had this vision for the app, but again, that was, by the way, right, like shortly after college. So for both of us, we're fairly green. And we had the idea and we started building the tool. We hadn't been, prior to that, we were consultants, we weren't recruiters. But so we started building the tool. It took months to build it. And then at that point, we were like, okay, we have to sell this. And it had never occurred to us that we should have integrated and included our buyer into the building process and basically our customer much more into the building process. So what we changed with BoldVoice is that we didn't write a single line of code before we actually tested a prototype of the app. There wasn't even an app to test. What I did is that I started working with one of our incredible coaches, Ron Carlos, a Hollywood accent and dialect coach. And I asked him to create, I believe it was maybe 8 or 10 very short video lessons. He recorded them on his iPhone. So no production value whatsoever. Then I ran a survey at Harvard and a bunch of the other schools asking international students about their experiences with accents. And then from that survey, I got a list of people who would have been interested in trying out a first iteration of a product. So I had that list. Essentially, I sent Ron's videos via email to those people who wanted to try out the prototype. And then we didn't have obviously any of the AI feedback, but instead of that, we sent them like PDFs attachments with like these words to read. And then they would read those words, they record them on their phones, send them to us. And then Ron would grade them and then send them back. So it was like a very, very manual process. Again, just email PDFs, nothing fancy. But that was enough for us to validate the core point, which was, can we get improvement from people not working one-on-one with a coach, but from them just getting asynchronous short form videos and little practice materials and getting a little bit of feedback. And that was enough to validate that we got befores and afters, and we saw that there was a change there. And that gave us validation that, okay, let's start actually building the app. And that, by the way, continued. It's not like we stopped there. At every point, we made sure to integrate user feedback into the product development process. We pushed the product out before we were fully ready. There's that famous quote about, if you're not embarrassed from your first launch, you launch too late. So we made sure to avoid let's build it perfectly and then they'll come. We made sure to validate at each point that the users were getting value from the app, but more than that, we're getting their feedback and making it better at every step. So I would say that obviously lots of other things, but I would say that, the biggest change from the first startup to the now BoldVoice is almost launching with the user and keeping your customer in the loop of your growth.
I'm so happy to hear that, because that's a problem that I see a lot of people facing, but also it's a perfect transition because I wanted to talk to you about YC, Y Combinator, which you've been through. And I was listening to you and it reminded me of two very famous quotes, other quotes. The one you mentioned was, I think it's from Reid Hoffman, founder of LinkedIn, about being embarrassed. But it reminded me of make something people want. That's the baseline of YC. And so if you're not talking to your customers, if you're not already, trying to sell them, you don't know if people actually want that. And then it reminds me of another quote, which I think is Paul Graham, who said, do things that don't scale, which again, sending, a PDF attachment and a video doesn't scale at all, but that's surprisingly exactly how Silicon Valley and great startups are built. And so you did exactly this, perfect blueprint for success. Turns out it's working out. Congratulations. You took all of those advice at heart. So that's the perfect segue for me to ask you about YC. So as you know, I've decided quite a long time ago to only invest in YC startups. Why? Because I think it's such a great filter and it increases my odds of success, of finding amazing companies, because YC is already filtering through everyone who's trying to get to YC. And I think to remember, YC only accepts less than 1% of people who apply. So please tell me a little bit. So that's why I chose to invest in YC, but tell me about your experience at YC a little bit. What did it bring you? And maybe would you recommend it to other founders?
I'd say YC is definitely one of the best decisions we've made with BoldVoice. We joined it when we were very early. So it was an incredible accelerant to us for setting a pace for obviously during the initial cohort, that was about 2 months, but also setting that same high pace and cadence and standard for ourselves for the duration, for the rest of the time of the company. We actually had a term sheet before we got into YC. So we had the option of not taking YC because that was not our biggest or our only source of funding. If anything, YC's deal is worse on paper because it is at a very low valuation cap. However, what you get out of it with the intangibles in a way is much more outweighs the initial ownership stake, I would say, that you leave on the table. So that initial experience of joining YC definitely pre-revenue, but for us almost pre-product, and then building it super quickly, and then having, in a sense, the pressure, not just from YC, but from your cohort and from seeing the amazing things that other founders are building, and seeing how fast they're moving keeps you super accountable to move very quickly. So I would say that if we hadn't done YC, maybe it would have taken many more months to launch. But with YC, we knew that demo day was 3 months down the line, and we had to launch soon in order to get and be able to see revenue by demo day. So it pushed us to move really quickly. And I would say even after our batch ended, we still get incredible value from it. We go back every year, twice a year to SF. We're normally based in New York. We meet our partners. We sit down with Michael Seibel, who's incredible. And the nuggets of knowledge or the insights from those conversations are always priceless and almost will always send me and my co-founder into the drawing board. And we're like, okay, we got to do a few things differently. And it's so important to kind of get that little, I guess, the little spark to not ever treat a startup as business as usual, but to always be checking our blind spots and always be changing. And then, of course, the community is also incredible, and being able to get access and benefit from this shared knowledge of other founders, people who are better than you in XYZ ways, being able to get on a call with them and exchange learnings, that's incredible, and that lasts throughout the life of the company.
That's awesome. I couldn't agree more. That's what I hear from most founders who go through YC. And it's crazy to me that some people still tell me YC is not worth it. They should probably just listen to this very short clip that you just did. And for me, it's all the proof that you need. But again, that's exactly why you basically embodied in your answer why I'm investing in YC and why I think it's absolutely great place for founders. Okay, we talked about the difficulties you've had along the way, the first startup, the second one, the hiring. Let's talk about the positive or what's going well. I want to ask you about maybe a moment where things kind of clicked, where things kind of fell into place and you're like, okay, this is it. Did that moment ever happen? I think it probably must have, again, seeing the numbers that you have today. So what was it that at some point you realized, okay, we're really having something, it's really falling into place? Tell us about that moment, please. That's super exciting.
I don't know that there's one moment. I think it's a journey. And at every point, I don't think of product market fit as you didn't have it and now you have it. I think it's a journey and a sliding scale, and you get closer and closer to it as the product gets better. And even if you think about a product that is much more established, like Duolingo, they had growth and then they plateaued, and then they figured out ways to get more growth, and then continuously like that. So for us as a consumer product, my favorite thing is to listen to users and get user feedback. And that is the validation at various points where we saw that this was working for people because of what they told us. There was, if I had to pick a moment, I would say that about maybe 9 months or so, a bit less than a year after starting BoldVoice, we had all these users into the product, and we had talked to them, but mostly we had looked at the stats. But then we had, again, going back, we had a conversation with Michael from YC, and then Ilya and I got back from that, and we were like, we got to do user interviews. And we sat down and we blocked out a whole week, and we did, I want to say 80 user interviews in 1 week between the two of us. And it was a grind, right? It was like every day we would sit and have 6 or 8 of these and talk to users. And that was both like a very helpful moment to understand how could we make the app better, but also hearing from these people that this was working for them. Because it's one thing to download an app and to want to give it a shot that just speaks to this is a real problem for me, but it's a different thing to continue to use it because that speaks to this solution is working for me. So being able to not just see that through the data, but hear from people, I love this app. It has helped me so much. And all that, the real human stories, I think, will never lose their impact, even when you have the data. So definitely, yeah, I would encourage all the other founders to, you can do it in like a blitz, like we did, like do a lot at once, which is very helpful. Or what we do now is that we pepper them every week. We have a couple of user interviews. So that always helps us have the finger on the pulse of what's going on with our users. But yeah, it's a journey. It's not a moment. It's a constant kind of effort to always make things a little bit better.
I love that answer. I didn't expect this at all, but I absolutely love it because so many people think success is instantaneous. You always hear about the overnight success of like, oh my God, yesterday, BoldVoice, no one knew about it. And tomorrow, boom, BoldVoice is at the front of the scene. And that's really not how life works. Mm-hmm. For startups, for, actors, for anything successful, I think you're absolutely right. Probably my question was not the best because it's not a one moment in time. It's a journey, but there's a huge misconception about that. People do think it's overnight. And so for me, for listeners, hopefully for me, it's super inspiring to remember nothing happens like this overnight. It is a journey. You got to keep pushing and improving, and it's small iterations and always improving. Also, talking to users is something I do hear a lot of YC companies do. And probably it's sort of specific to YC. I mean, anyone can do it, but I mostly hear it at YC, which I think is super, super interesting. And again, super inspiring.
Yeah, just to kind of expand on that point real quick, it's funny because to the outside world, it seems like, oh, you guys were on Forbes, you were on TechCrunch, and those seem like the shining moments. And yes, it's always fun. It's always fun to be able to send that to my mom and say, look, but that's not really connected to like the big successes of the company and that would make or break anything. So it's always funny to me how what seems to the outside like an overnight success or this big moment was actually, not really anything major for the company. Always nice to get PR, right? But that will only help you so much and the effect will go away. There's nothing like just building a successful and helpful product for the users. And that is not something you can do overnight.
Absolutely. And I do know, and probably you do as well, I do know a lot of companies who get a lot of PR, and in the press, they're amazing. Everything's so great. When you actually know them and see what's going on behind the curtains, you know that it's actually not so great. So press is not synonymous to amazing, and vice versa. Some companies are doing great in the shadows. Obviously, I won't name names. That's not that kind of show. But yes, it's nice, but it's only a small thing along the way. Okay, moving on to, well, not moving on. Actually, you mentioned YC and how it helped you. And then you mentioned fundraising, 2021, sort of easy. I guess it's never easy. And then 2023, much harder. So there are probably some listeners trying to figure out how to raise funds. A lot of people are trying to raise money all the time, whatever the market conditions are. Could you tell us a little bit about maybe what's your best advice or your do's and don'ts for fundraising? What would you advise someone listening to us trying to raise money right now?
I would say that it needs to be approached as a process, as a very organized, almost a sales process, a sales pipeline. Before we get to that, I would say that make sure that you are at the strongest position you'll be in this time period to tell the strongest story that you can. So if it is possible, if you're pre-revenue, and it ideally get to a point that you have some revenue to show, even if it's at very initial stages. If you're, a month away from a big potential contract, try to get that proof point. Because obviously, especially even early stage investors who mostly invest out of potential, the more of these proof points that you'll have, the higher your valuation will be. So invest in getting to those things. Of course, if you absolutely need the capital before you can do those things, then that's fair game. But if you can't, do whatever you can basically to get your startup to as high of a stage of maturity with the funding that you already have and within a reasonable time frame. Don't, if you only have 1 month or don't get yourself to the point where you have 1 month of funding left in the bank, because then you lose your negotiation kind of points there. So I would say, obviously, basically build a good company and try to get as much traction as possible. That's the biggest thing that will bring success in general and success in fundraising as well. But other than that, in terms of fundraising specific advice, I'd say, again, run it like a process, make sure that you're very buttoned up about all the documents, have everything in place, have the pitch deck telling the story, have all the data room with all the other documents ready to go, because what you want to do is run as parallel of a process as possible with multiple parties, so that you increase the chances of creating FOMO because people talk to each other, and therefore almost having a race where people are trying to compete and get to that deal as soon as possible. The biggest thing that you have in your favor, or the biggest asset to control, is time. So you want to run the process as quickly as you can, because if the deal is out there for many, many months, then again, investors talk, it kind of can give the message that this is not a good deal. And also it wastes a lot of your time, which is the biggest thing. Fundraising as the founder CEO, it will become your full-time job. So during that time that it's happening. So if you run that process for 9 months or a year, that's a year that you're not doing other things for a company. So running a really tight process is both good in terms of the messaging to the investors, because they think it's a hot deal. They were talking to a lot of people at the same time, but it also conserves your time down the line. I have a lot of other nitty-gritty things about that, but I think that's the main thing, is to run a parallel process and get things moving as quickly as you can.
That's pretty impressive. I mean, I can tell you're a pro, and that's, in my opinion, again, something that YC does bring to founders. It helps you fundraise so quickly, especially the first fundraise around demo day, because you got so many eyes on you. The entire world basically is looking for the latest batch, the new blood. And some startups fundraise in a week, which is insane in terms of what you just said. You can just go back to work. Usually YC startups raise more than regular startups, so you get more money in the bank quickly, faster than you would have, and then you can just go back to work after a week. Maybe even if it's a long process, it's like 2-3 weeks, but for a couple $1 million, it's super efficient. And first of all, YC brings you the eyeballs, but also teaches you, I'm guessing, I'm not sure, but I'm guessing a lot of stuff you just mentioned, you learned at YC, because they do tell you how to fundraise. Thank you for that. So those are very, very applicable. Do you want to tell us a little bit about BoldVoice today? And then my next question is going to be the future. But do you want to tell us a bit about the numbers and the successes? Because we didn't really get to that, but BoldVoice is crushing it. So what can you tell us?
Yeah, I mean, we've come far in the about 2.5 years that we've been building this. The app has been downloaded by over 1 million people. I think we've covered over 100 countries. Our bread and butter is still the US and the US immigrants, but it's really cool to see people from all over the world on BoldVoice. I don't want to share specific revenue numbers, but the growth is very promising. We're really excited, mostly about the user feedback and the fact that this is resonating. I think our star rating on the App Store is 4.8 out of 5. So striving to continue to keep that the high quality. And in terms of internally within the company, we are obviously growing fast, but we are not done with building the product. That is still our main focus, is to continue to make this better and better. And there's a lot of initiatives happening internally with continuing to leverage the best of AI to continue to bring the best product out there. And for us, that takes the shape of both the underlying voice model that we're always refining, because we have millions and millions of data points from users to be able to make a better and better model. And then on top of that, we're also working with LLMs and partnering with OpenAI to take that initial model and then to be able to allow users to have natural conversations with it while getting graded on their pronunciation. So we went from, in the early days, you would only read this prescripted phrases and conversations. Now you're able to have a fully natural conversation on whatever topic you want. So for example, if you're about to do your YC pitch, you can come into BoldVoice and then just start speaking, and we'll score you and give you feedback on exactly what you said. Or you can mimic a conversation with an investor, and we will constantly give you that back and forth. So yeah, when we started doing this, LLMs were not a thing. We're doing AI before AI was cool, but now we're always layering on the newest and the best of breed. So yeah, lots of super exciting things going on. But yeah, I think very focused again on the user and the product and solving the user's problem.
That's amazing. Again, so excited to hear you say that. And I do know a couple YC startups who would probably need a little bit of accent coaching, so I'll make sure to refer them to you. And It seems things are going really well. Any plans for the future? Any things you want to share about the future of BoldVoice? New ideas that you want to bring to market, or where do you see the company going in a couple months and years?
Definitely. So we are, as I mentioned, currently mostly US based, but as we talked about, there's a future for BoldVoice globally. So I'm really excited to take it to that next step over the coming months and years to make BoldVoice accessible to people all over the world, which it already is, but to partner more closely with the local communities to be able to spread BoldVoice and make it a really, truly global product. On top of that, something I've started seeing a lot of interest from has been companies and corporations and organizations wanting to give BoldVoice to their members. So that is extremely promising for us and makes a lot of sense because, again, BoldVoice is a professional product. People use it so they can get more confident in life, but specifically so they can do better in their jobs, get better professional opportunities. So we've gotten a lot of interest from companies, let's say in consulting, in sales, and a lot of business function where communication is really important. So that's something that we're also really excited now that we validated that the product really works for the consumer to be able to layer on that, the B2B motion on top of it. So yeah, I guess the takeaway, if anybody listening to this is the head of an international company or has employees who are non-native speakers, this could potentially make a great tool in their toolkit to advance their communication and their careers.
That's awesome. Perfect. There is a lot of sales was so obvious when I heard you. I was like, obviously you want salespeople to have, confidence over the phone. So that's such a non-brainer. We're almost out of time, which is perfect timing because I'm almost out of questions. I got two more. One is if people do want to find you, find BoldVoice, I'm guessing the best thing is to type BoldVoice on the App Store or Google Store. But if people want to find you or find BoldVoice, what's the best way to reach you and try your tool?
BoldVoice is on the App Store. It's on Google Play. So wherever you get your apps, try it out. I would love to hear feedback. And we do have a 1-week free trial, so you can give it a shot and see if it works for you. In terms of me, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Twitter. There's only one of me with my name. Thanks, parents. So you can find me easily. And yeah, it'd be great to connect with people and continue to share more insights as we go along the journey.
Perfect. And we will put BoldVoice in the show notes, obviously. Then one last question that I do like to ask, probably I should ask it to almost everyone. I don't usually have the time, but here we do. Is there either a book or a quote, either or it could be both, that really, really had an impact on your life? I do have some books and some quotes that I keep in my mind for years and years and years because I just think they're so fascinating. So I'd love to hear if there's any such things for you, books, quotes that really do have an impact and that you live by almost on a day-to-day basis.
That's a fun, stumping question to ask right at the end. One book that I read recently that I would definitely recommend is 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals by, I believe, Oliver Berg. And it's a anti-time management book, but because it's not teaching you, I guess, how to fit more things into your day-to-day to make you more productive. It's more about helping you understand what are your priorities and how to live a life where you're not constantly running on the rat race and on the kind of treadmill of never-ending to-do lists, but helps you prioritize what's really important and how to think about decisions, whether professional or in life. And it kind of takes away a little bit of the anxiety of like, you have to do it all because that's not achievable in human life, but really helps you kind of hone into what are your values and how do you want to spend your limited time on earth. So I think it's a really good book, not just career-wise, but also, in terms of perspective of how to live a fulfilling life. I don't have a good quote from it right now that comes to mind, but people should check it out.
That's perfect. Thank you so much. Time management is such an important topic, and I think we should always keep learning on that topic. So I will definitely read it. Thank you so much, Anada, for joining us. Thank you for your time. It was amazing to be with you today. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on the Lobster Talks podcast. Don't forget to subscribe for more conversations with YC founders and founders of startups of the world. And don't forget to rate us and leave a review or comment on your favorite podcast platform. Anada, thank you again for joining us.
Thanks so much, Gabriel.